thank you everyone and welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. And a special thank you to Girls in Tech, who is our partner for this special session. And, we're really delighted that we have the opportunity to explore this really important topic with all of you. My name is Nicole Tzavaras and I'm the Head of People Experience at DiUS. I have the honour and the absolute delight of moderating this panel today with a group of amazing women who are all here to share their own experiences and their tips and their wisdom on how we can continue to foster inclusive environments so that we can stop women from leaving tech. You're going to hear from, these women in their own way, but we have such a diverse range of experience and backgrounds. We've got engineering, we've got sales, there's marketing, there's project and product management, there's HR and recruitment, we've got philosophers, we've got agile and scrum experience, and there's a wealth of startup knowledge as well. You're hearing from women who've founded multiple businesses with extensive leadership experience, and all with a passion to make a difference in this particular topic. So we're going to get started. We all know what the research and what the data is telling us. We all know that there is a smaller percentage of women who get into the tech industry, but we have an even bigger problem when we are looking at data that suggests that 50% of women leave tech roles by the time they hit 35. So that's the concept for our discussion today. What can we do about it? Our format today is going to be really simple. We're going to introduce each of the panel. They're going to share a little bit about themselves, and then we're basically going to open it up to your questions. So we are going to basically ask you to send through your questions via this text message, or if you feel like you want to, you can also pop it up in this chat on the Google Meet. But we really wanted to just have a very raw, open, authentic conversation and answer as many of your questions as you can. So let us know what they are, and we may get started now. So the first person I wanted to introduce you to is Renece Brewster. So currently the CEO and co-founder of Visual Domain and the co-managing director of Girls in Tech. Renece has leveraged her passion for emerging tech to build multidisciplinary businesses that spans across multiple industries. Renece, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your story and what you're passionate about?
Sure thing. First up, pressure. My name is Renece. I've been with Girls in Tech now for 7 years. I'd be getting some long service leave if it wasn't a volunteer role. I first started as a volunteer. I then joined the board and now have the privileged position of co-managing director. Personally, I love it because I feel like I found my people, and I think that sense of belonging is so relevant to the discussion that we're having today. And I think the reason why women and anyone really leaves the workforce. But to touch on my professional career, I, as Nicole mentioned, co-founded Australia's largest video production company called Visual Domain back in 2008. And if I think back to that time and why I actually started a business, it's actually very relevant to the conversation we're having here. I found myself at the sort of, beginning of my career at a really fast-paced, emerging tech startup. We were building websites before people had websites. It was groundbreaking, trying to convince them why they needed one. Over the course of my 3 and a bit years there, we went from having about 4 employees to 40. And along that journey, I really felt like I was on the ground floor with the founder. Every afternoon after work, we would get together and discuss, what we've got to get done the next day and what the challenges are. And I really got that sense of belonging and also just feeling like the work that I did really was valued and it mattered. And I worked so hard for that organisation. So when I had the very happy news that I was expecting my first child once I reached that kind of pivotal 12-week mark, I couldn't wait to go in and actually tell them, because I thought they'd be so excited for me and the family that I was growing. It was almost instant after telling them that I was pregnant that I just became invisible, like in a heartbeat. Those afternoon sessions that I had so loved stopped. I think it's like I just got written off almost straight away. And obviously this is a parental story and one that's very personal to me. But when it came time to kind of, want to start child number 2, and it was at a particular point in time working for another tech startup making mobile websites before the iPhone went into administration. Great idea, just business at the wrong time. Looking for my next career, going to interviews, knowing in my head, child number 2, I really want to start pursuing that. It's like I instantly got that horrible, dreaded feeling that I had lived at the first tech startup, that I was going to be invisible again, or I was going to be written off, if I were to get pregnant within the first few months of working for this company, if I was fortunate enough. It was that honestly led me, because I'm a hard worker. Like, having the babies don't stop me. I work 9, all hours of the night. Not recommending that for anyone, but that's just me, and I love it. So that's the life I choose. But that's what really led me to start Visual Domain. It's sort of like, if I can't find that career that I know I will put my heart and soul into, I'm going to make it for myself. And 15 years on, we're Australia's largest. We've got a team of 100. We create anywhere from 200 to 300 videos every week for some of Australia's biggest brands. We've got a tech platform that's underpinning us. But I think that real sense of belonging and just feeling like you're valued at a workplace just goes such a long way to hanging around and, not to judge a book by its cover, which I certainly was and lived through. So very long-winded introduction, but I hope that sort of paints a picture of sort of my experience through this being quite unique.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Renece. Next, I want to introduce you to Paula Burton, currently the CEO and co-founder of Mass Dynamics, as well as a co-founder of Flying Robot School, with a career history that includes engineering, business analytics, strategy, marketing, and partnerships. Paula is a post-tech polymath who, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket, can control an unruly pub crowd on a charity night, and then the next day suit up to explain market potential of some complex science topics to investors. Paula, tell us a little bit more.
Hi, Nicole. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the intro. I got that written for me by someone who knows me well, and so I stole it. I was like, you know what? I like it, and
That's awesome.
So, I'm not going to take credit for that profile at all. Great to see everyone. Thanks, Renece. That was an awesome intro. Depending on how deep we want to go, I guess. Like for me, I was a software engineer by trade, and really early on in my career, kind of. I probably did feel a little bit out of where I was meant to be. Like if I looked around at my, the course that I did, which was computing, like there was maybe 2 out of 130 women. So pretty early on, I was like, am I in the right place? Am I in the right room? I went from there into something that, at the time I felt was more me, which was taking my engineering skill set and moving it onto the business side of things. It was through great mentors, great support, great leaders in my journey that really helped me understand my superpower. And that was by understanding, that the power and the beauty of software engineering and being able to communicate those concepts to business people and to really be, I don't want to say the glue, because I know we sort of throw that term around a lot when we talk about women, but really knowing that super strength of being able to bring people together to build solutions and solve problems. So for me, like that was pretty much, 2 decades in consulting, really using that skill set and leaning in hard. Happy to dive into any part of my career, but I think what I'm really passionate about and why I'm here and volunteering my time for this is because, my journey over the last 3 or 4 years founding Mass Dynamics, I've learned so much about myself. And really leaning in even harder into that superpower. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I'm no longer talking about that from a software engineering sense. I'm talking about science, like something that I was a complete stranger to 4 years ago. So, thinking about all the ways to use your skill set and being aware of it to be able to bring together different multidisciplinary teams, whether that be different genders, different cultures, different skill sets, different capabilities. It's trying to bring every last skill in to be able to deliver a product, which we are in Mass Dynamics, which is a SciTech data and analysis platform. So that's me at a very, very high level. But really passionate to share any stories and hear from everyone else as well about what they're doing to really try and solve this challenge.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paula. Really impressive. Next, I want to introduce you to Bernie Coyer, who's an experienced leader in the world of Agile, having spent the last 30 plus years working across industries as an Agile coach, as a Scrum Master. She's been a program manager, a project manager, led national teams. She's currently working as a delivery consultant at DiUS. Bernie, we'd love to hear from you too.
Well, it's a bit tough to follow those two, isn't it?
Not at all.
Yes, I learned to code on cards at uni, in the early 80s. So it was still a very exciting and new place to go. And it was certainly not a place that there were many women. My brothers learned to code at school, so I was miles behind the rest of the males in my course, right from the word go. So I had to really pick up and go. And I think really I was lucky that my first role, a bit like Paula, I learned to take what I'd learnt at uni and take it into the business realm. So I actually, my first role was at St Vincent's Hospital, and I started supporting a consulting firm that came in to do a new nurse rostering system. And my first gig was with a stopwatch and a clipboard, actually doing time and motion studies. So that's where I started a long time ago, and I've done lots of different things. Very much on a more, not on a global level by any means, but certainly I've worked in the UK on really exciting programs of work. I worked in Steve Brack's Department of Premier and Cabinet on cross-government projects. And from a standing start, we delivered something in 6 months for the Commonwealth Games in Melbourne. So that was, which was a pretty amazing achievement, I think. In the late 2000s, I jumped into consulting and was introduced to the joys of agile delivery. And I've spent the next 17 years working as an agile consultant. I've done, as Nicole's just said, I've done everything from pre-sales and training and Scrum Master, etc., and even a stint in management. I now work with a small team, which I actually prefer. It's much more on a personal scale, and I think the skill sets that I bring to making decisions and helping our clients achieve things are because I've got the experience that I've had as a woman coming through all of these things. And I think probably in the early, probably 20 years, I just got my head down and got on with it, because it didn't matter to me that I was the only woman in the room or the only woman on the team. It really was a case of, I just, I will show them that I can do this, and they will give me the plaudits for it. But it doesn't always work that way. So I think we really do have to change the conversation, and we shouldn't have to be handling the imposter syndrome and all the other things that we as women feel. Anyway, that's what I'm passionate about. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you, Bernie. Next up, I'd like to introduce Nicole Gibson, a modern day philosopher, redefining what it means to be an entrepreneur and obsessed with love's power to affect change. Nicole is currently the CEO and founder of Love Out Loud and the CEO and founder for In Truth. Listed as Australia's top 100 most influential women, a finalist for Young Australian of the Year, and a Pride of Australian medalist, Nicole's only just getting started. Nicole, tell us a little bit more.
Thanks, Nick. Look, it pales in comparison to Paula's achievements of being able to pull through after rallying a pub together on the previous night. This is a great intro, Paula. Hey, it's so cool listening to everyone's stories, and I've had such a different background in so many ways, in that if you had told me even 3 years ago that I'd be running a tech company, I would have really, really struggled to believe you, because my background was seemingly so far removed from tech, much more in the social entrepreneurship and humanitarian sector. And I'll share a bit about that. But what was really interesting about coming into tech is, and part of why I'm really passionate about what we're all doing here and joining in this conversation for, is the background that I had working with people in disenfranchised communities and mental health. What I started to recognize is we really need scalable solutions that that come from a more compassionate and an empathetic lens. And the deeper I go in technology and the more I understand the landscape of what technology really is about and the power it has to shape and define and redefine our world, the more passionate I become about ensuring that the more traditionally understood as, you know, the feminine perspective is really represented in the right ways as we build out, you know, the future landscape of technology in our world. It is so important on so many levels. So yeah, just thank you for all of the women that contribute, you know, in that way. It's so needed. When I started my entrepreneurial journey, I had just come out of a lived experience with a life-threatening eating disorder, and I had a very kind of raw and confronting experience in our health system. And luckily, I had, you know, the type of leaders in my life that really showed me the true power of compassion, because my experience of the health system itself really in many ways lacked that humanitarian touch, which I think is so crucial if we want to create true healing in the world. And so I came out of that experience really understanding that, you know, if we can't be present with the pain in our world, if we can't truly extend, you know, our hearts and our spirit to the suffering that's right in front of us, how well equipped or well versed are we really to solve some of the world's most significant problems? Because one thing that I've learned in my entrepreneurial journey is the more present we can really be and the more we can empathize with the people that we're trying to solve the problems for, the more effective and sustainable the solutions are that we design. And in my lived experience, I really started to recognize that so much of that's been missing, you know, from so many of our world systems. And so as an 18-year-old, I didn't want to go out into the world preaching that. I wanted to go out into the world and listen to see if this hypothesis that I'd formed through my journey, if there was a consensus. And I bought a van for about $3,500, and I decided to travel to remote communities, thinking that would be, you know, a few months, and it ended up being just over 2 years. I lived very atypically of other 18-year-olds at the time, really without Wi-Fi or any of that. I renounced most of my material possessions, and I ran about 3 or 4 workshops every day for 2 years. And the intent of those workshops, which reached over 50,000 people by the end of that tour, was to listen, to go into communities and to really ask the question, you know, what needs to be said that's not being said, and how does that have a ripple effect on the well-being of this community? Now, 12 years ago, that was considered a very left field kind of radical take on mental health, which kind of seems crazy looking back. But the fact that there were and are cultural and environmental reasons why we have high levels of stress, anxiety, and essentially a mental health crisis was really considered to be quite an unusual way of looking at that problem. And in listening to people, I really started to become very moved by the human spirit, because during those 2 years, I listened to the story of 70-year-old CEOs in high-powered positions, and I listened to the stories of 10-year-old Indigenous students, you know, in communities that had no more than 30 people and everything in between. And although their lives were so different on the outside, what I really started to uncover was there is this truth, this technology actually inside of all of us that is seeking to love and be loved. And when that's not met with the right amount of presence, we can seek that in very destructive ways. And I really started to realize that the absence of love and compassion in our world actually, well, my philosophy is that the source of many of the dysfunctional systems and the dysfunctional cultures in our world all come back to this. And so I was inspired to want to scale that, that message, because I started to recognize that a lot of people don't have the emotional awareness. A lot of people don't have the emotional vernacular, to actually communicate how they feel and have difficult conversations. And what that means is we just don't. And so the foundations, which a lot of our communities, whether that's a workplace or a broader community, are built on, are fractured. So I became obsessed with solving this problem. And that took me on all kinds of crazy adventures, from serving as the youngest federal commissioner in mental health in Australia, all the way through to writing a philosophical framework called Love Out Loud, to transforming that into a training and events company, and now to building the technology we're building, which will support people to actually see in real time what their emotional state is and how to rebalance themselves moment to moment. Because when we really look at this ultimate vision we have as a company to actualize a civilization of love, what that comes back to is enough of us actually taking personal ownership and responsibility of our emotional state. And I really do believe that the feminine approach on so many levels is quintessential for us actually being able to build that utopian version of the world that I know so many of us are rooting for during these times where it really looks like it could go, in either direction.
Amazing. So powerful. Thank you, Nicole. And I'm hoping it's all of these stories are spurring a lot of questions from people. I know they're definitely spurring questions from me. So if you've got questions, don't forget to either send them through via text or pop it up in the chat. We've got a couple more people to introduce, and then we're going to hit some of the questions. So Karen, I'd like to introduce you next. Karen Katz, Director of KK Consulting and also board member for Girls in Tech. Mama Katz also has a varied career background, initially starting off as a business analyst, moving into HR and recruitment, and is now very focused on empowering and educating women and coaching and supporting women to further their careers in the tech industry. Karen, do you want to tell us a little bit more?
Just stop the dog pawing at my leg. It's always the time when you don't need that always happens. Thank you. I guess for me, I have a bit of variety in my career. I was very much the woman in tech as a business analyst many moons ago. I think it's funny that Nicole said that when she was 18, she shunned Wi-Fi. It didn't exist when I was 18. But side issue. I was one of 20 girls in a 50-person course, a Bachelor of Information Technology, as it was back in the day. And, if I have a look how that has sort of evolved now to the number of women that we have studying at university, that it has dropped in that time, that if you look at percentages, that worries me terribly. What I guess, I mean, on balance there are so many ways to be involved in technology without necessarily studying at university. And again, Nicole, you're a perfect example of that. I think that for me, my career has evolved into the human resources sector, but I'm still very closely tied to technology. Many of my clients are small technology companies. And I guess the reason that I love it is because I get it. I get the people who operate in this sector and I love them dearly. In terms of Girls in Tech, I've been sitting on the board now for 6 years. And I originally joined because the former managing director was someone who I had originally hired at a company I worked at many years ago. And she said, come on, let's do this. Come on board. And I haven't looked back since. The difference that we have made in so many women's lives along the way, it's just the best thing ever. Like the feeling when someone said to me once, after having been to one of our what we call a girl boss night, which is a panel event, very inspirational, that it gave her enough confidence to go and demand that promotion and demand that pay rise. Like, I float on that story like you can't begin to believe. However, it really turned for me last year when I was fortunate enough to I've got 2 teenage girls and all my hair. And my younger child is obsessed with girls in tech, and Renece, by the way, but we'll put that aside for now. But absolutely loves it, loves coming along, loves learning, loves being part of what it is that we're doing. And, you know, if the next generation are getting something from what it is that we're doing, then that absolutely warms the cockles of my heart. In terms of what I'm passionate about, I'm looking to empower women in this space, I mean, overall anyway, but particularly within this space, because I've seen so many barriers along the way. And we just want to knock those down. And we want, and I use the term empower, we want to empower women to be able to stand up and to do better and to be able to be who it is that they deserve to be. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. I'm hoping there's a lot of questions that come out of that, but if not, I will pull them through. But before we get there, last person I wanted to introduce you all to is Michelle Gleeson. Michelle has an engineering background as well and has worked her way up over the last 20 years into CTO and engineering director type roles. Michelle experienced many of the common challenges face and was herself considering leaving tech, but instead decided to create change. And she is now the co-founder of Collider and also the founder of the Tech Leading Ladies Meetup group. So Michelle, we'd love to hear a little more from you too.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. What amazing stories. I've really enjoyed hearing everybody's journeys. My journey in tech has been quite a traditional one. I was at uni, as many people here have said, and experienced only a handful of women. Somehow I didn't even realize that tech was male dominated even then. So going into my first junior position was actually with a small consultancy. The CTO co-founder was a woman, we had over 50% representation of women in the group, which was, I've learned later, unheard of. And I think this really helped me in my early journey to not face that imposter syndrome that a lot of women face, and to see role models that look like me early on. And it wasn't until later when I was getting up to senior engineer, technical leader type roles, that I really recognised that there was a lot of those microaggressions and unconscious bias that we all face. I can see a few people nodding. And it was also about this time when I thought, I've had enough. I have to prove myself over and over again, much more than the male peers around me. And I found it exhausting. And I was ready to leave tech completely. But I was really sad because I love building software. But I just didn't feel like I belonged in those teams. And so I actually started researching, like, how is coding a transferable skill? Like, what can you transfer that skill to if you want to leave? And I started finding out not what coding can be transferred into, but the fact that women of my age and career level are often leaving tech. And I learned why that was. So, I learned about unconscious bias for the first time, and some of the challenges we face, and also that there were amazing people like those we've heard from today that were working to fix this. And I decided I wasn't going to leave tech, and instead I was going to stay and try to change things for others and make it easier for them. And I spent about 2 years working really, really hard inside the company I was in, trying to get more women into our team. So at the time it was just me and about 40 men. And we did things like grad programs and career changing. We got lots of women to come in, which was fantastic. And in 2 years, we got to over 33% women in tech, which was phenomenal. But I also realized that those women weren't progressing as fast as their male peers. So they were coming into the company, but they weren't getting promoted. And that's when I decided to change my focus from getting women into the industry to making sure that the ones that were here had everything they needed to succeed. And that's when we set up Tech Leading Ladies. So this was a community group that was designed to give women the skills, the tools and the networks they needed to thrive. I've been running that for 5 years now. And every year our members report that they have greater job satisfaction and have been promoted based on the advice that we've given them to sort of overcome these barriers inside their organisations, which is very fulfilling. But it was about just over a year ago, I was chatting to the co-founders of Tech Leading Ladies, and we were a little bit frustrated because we were still having new members join that were facing these systemic barriers inside their organisations. And we thought, well, we're not making enough of an impact. Yes, you know, there's a handful of people that are able to break through this bias, but what we need to do is actually remove the bias and remove these systemic barriers for these women instead. And so that's when we formed Collider, which was called Tech Diversity Lab at the time. We've just rebranded. And we started to think about, well, how can we actually change these systemic barriers? And looking back on my own career leading large engineering teams and you know, working as a CTO, I've been able to create really diverse and high-performing teams. And so looking why that is, in each circumstance, we created really detailed career growth frameworks that made it very clear to everybody what they needed to do to succeed. So you weren't getting subjective feedback on how to progress in your career anymore. And it also helps to put data behind promotion decisions as well. And it does a lot of things, but yeah. So what we wanted to do was take all those learnings that I had from leading these teams and put them into a product, a platform that was really easy for other engineering leaders to just pick up and roll out off the shelf and include all those aspects of building diverse and inclusive teams that our co-founding team had come to know. So that's what we've been doing for the last year or so. Thank you. I'll hand back over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. And each of you, thank you so much for sharing your stories. So inspiring in your own ways. We do have a couple of questions that are coming through, so I might just start pulling them out. So the first question that came through, and I might ask, Karen, I might ask you to start, but any of our panelists, you know, if you feel like there's more that you want to add to the answer, then feel free to jump in as well. But Karen, what are your thoughts when women are moving in different phases of their life? And is it women that take step backs, or is it the colleagues that create the environment to do that? And what can women do to keep climbing the ladder?
Oh my God, there's like 17 questions in that.
I know.
Look, I think I would answer that as an overall. Do we take a step back? Absolutely, we do. Should we? Classically, we should not. I think that is inherent in our nature and what we've conditioned to become. And I hate that. I really, truly do. With respect to the environments around us, I think that there's a lot of companies that are talking big on the diversity piece, but do inclusion terribly. So when we get there, it's like, yep, I've got targets. I work with so many different companies that say, Karen, find us a female. And it's like, sure, I'll just pop under this rock and I'll find you 17 of them. No problem. That's easy. It's all very well to bring women into your organization. It's another thing to make them feel valued once they get there. And Michelle, it sounds like you could probably talk to it better than I can. But I think that the inroads that we've made in recognizing that the differentiation and the diversity of thought and the way that we go about things is so different from a female perspective. And that once that is started to be appreciated and valued and promoted, that's when we'll make some serious inroads. I don't know if anyone has anything to add. Did I answer all of them? I'm sure I missed 3 questions in there.
I think I have something maybe to add, just as an individual when you're going through that change or that dynamic. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to think that you have to do both. And I know, and I'm sure the women here have been asked this question with every interview of how do you get work-life balance? Like, it doesn't exist, guys. Sometimes work gets heaps of your attention and sometimes home gets heaps of your attention. And sometimes you go through phases of your life where home and what you're doing is what is getting the attention. And I think just giving yourself a big break, that you don't have to do all of it. You can actually just focus on one area, and sometimes it's work too.
Yeah,
Could I
100%
just
agree.
add to that? In a recent Girls in Tech event, one of the female leaders that we were working with, she said, there is no work-life balance. She said, it's a pendulum. It's a pendulum. She said, sometimes you will work and sometimes you will life, but you're never going to do them both to the best of your ability at the best of times. And that question that just came up, why are men not ever asked about work-life balance? Sorry, just while we're on a roll. It's because we live by this traditional homemaker situation where, I mean, my husband, I love him, but he couldn't cook dinner to save himself. Right. So, in terms of where that's expected to come from, that's going to be me, or I dare say 2 of my children. I'm not eating the food that man makes. That being said, he's amazing around the rest of the house. But why don't we ask them? Is because we're the ones that are breaking down the barriers.
Yeah.
We don't have to break those down.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in and tie a couple of threads together on that, Karen. So the word inclusiveness, and I think a few of the panelists mentioned as well, is so critical here. And I think definitely we think about things that we can take away and really try. One thing I definitely try and do a lot of at Mass Dynamics is really make sure that that males and men who typically aren't the primary carer can be really open about taking leave for their children, and make it really obvious. We've got a channel called Wellbeing and Leave, and that we literally just say, guys, got to get the kids. I'll be back in an hour. Just little snippets of it, just to normalize that, and to really show that it's to everyone, that it's a parental thing. It's not just a female-led thing. So I think that's really key for inclusiveness, to make sure there's a safe space. And I make sure I do it too. I put my messages on there to make sure that it's a rule for everyone to really make sure that we're all accepting that. I think that's a really big one. And encouraging men to take leave. Who is it? Annabelle Crabb has that quote, women find it hard to ask for pay rises and men find it hard to ask for leave. And I think, as it turns out, typically, a man who is in your team potentially has a wife who is probably also working and needs that flexibility for her role. So it's kind of if we think outside, you think of systems and outside of our teams alone, our companies, what we do as leaders within our companies there's a flow-on effect to other companies and other females and other individuals within other teams. So I think think big in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a similar question. Oh, Bernie, yep, go for it.
I was just going to say, and I think that the pendulum that swings backwards and forwards, it depends on what phase of life you're in. It really does. And, there are times when you can do the meetups and do the training and go to the conferences and contribute to practices and do all the extra stuff that you need to do, which keep you visible and give you all of the kudos that goes with it. And there are times when you just cannot do all that because you've got sick children, or you've got, your parents, or whatever it is. There are times when those things, life has to take priority. So I think that's something that also applies to blokes.
There's a follow-on question that I'd like to just weave in here. Joe asked, how do men get better at being allies? Michelle, I might ask you to take this one too.
Yeah, this is fantastic. And I love the recognition that that's what's needed. Often in companies, we put a lot of onus on the women to make things better for themselves. Please come be part of every recruitment panel so that, we can show that we're diverse. That's exhausting. And so I think the way men can be better allies is to ask how they can help. Paula's spoken about glue work a lot, and we've referred to building inclusive cultures here. There's a lot you can do to build psychological safety for the people around you. How you conduct yourself in a code review or on a pull request can really maybe trigger somebody's imposter syndrome if you're not careful. And so, Nicole was talking about leading with empathy. Figure out what you can do to create that safe space, create that psychological safety. And if you're not sure, just ask. That would be my tip. Lean into that glue work and lead with empathy.
Yeah, amazing. Any other one? Anyone else want to add to that? I think it was very well said. Oh, Ritu.
I'll talk about a time that was a really useful career development moment for me, and it was about advocacy. I'd gone in and applied for a role, and the person who hired me told me I had asked for too little money and had gone out to advocate for me to earn more than them. And that for me was like this big turning point of like, oh wait, there are allies out there that I don't know about, and they're just looking for opportunities. So I wish there was some way of bringing these people out into the forefront and not like leaving them hanging around at the edges. And I do feel like sometimes we do that when a lot of the hey, we're going to do this diversity thing and it's all very women focused. I think it leaves a lot of people out in the cold.
Yep, I agree. Paula, there's a role that's come in and it's kind of links to Ritu's comment there around advocacy, but how much of a role have advocates played in your career?
Yeah, a really big one. So I think the way I think about advocates, like I think about, you know, I mentioned this in my introduction, like the critical nature of having that support throughout the career and leaning on mentors and so forth. So I'll talk about advocates in a sec, but I think the three things that definitely have helped me over the last few years is really thinking about three groups of support, and advocates fit in there. One is peers, so people who are like walking the journey at the same time as you, and you can kind of talk about what's happening in your world. Has been critical. Thinking about the next group is more like mentors, so someone who's a few years ahead of you who can see what you're about to, you know, encounter and so forth and give advice. And then there's a coach, and that's someone who's like giving you all different kinds of skill sets, you know, for life in general. And, you know, not necessarily related to business. So for me, like advocates fit in there across all of them really, because you want those people who you're confiding in and you're getting, you know, you're sharing things with, to be able to stand up for you where needed, and really look out for you. I think it's absolutely critical. I think the interesting thing that Renece said, like when she said about the news about having a child and, you know, just the horrific response that she got, I think if you're surrounded by people who are like that, to be aware of that and potentially run for the hills, because, you know, that they're people who don't understand what cognitive diversity means within a company and within a group. And, you know, they're clearly, that's really hard to change. And this is exactly why we're talking about this. And we're definitely, you know, going to think about ways to do it. But yeah, I think advocates are absolutely critical. Very, very lucky to have them along the way. Like some of the barriers that some of the women spoke about. I think for me, I've had people go, oh, Paula, like grab me by the scruff and go, do that over there, or do that over there, and help me maneuver within my career. So very, very lucky for that. As to advice of where to find them, I'm open to the panel to see what they think, but definitely a lot of community groups within, you know, people within your organization who are potentially, like I said, mentors or one step ahead of you is probably a good start.
Yeah, amazing. Renece.
I was just going to add, like, obviously the advocates that support us in those big and meaningful ways, like, have such a lasting impression. But even sometimes a lot of the small little ones that we look for, like being aware of who's in the meeting and just, you know, looking at them and knowing when they kind of want to talk but aren't, and asking them, did you have something to add? It's all those little moments where you give people that opportunity to just be heard and feel valued, that I think really makes a big difference to their confidence too.
Yeah, wonderful. Bernie, this one's for you. What are the things that have made you stay in this industry?
I think for me, it's always been the variety. Because in tech is the enabler, the platform. And I've worked with loads and loads of different clients, and we do interesting stuff. But along the way, I've met some extraordinary people. And for me, it's always been the people that have kept me here. I've got lifelong friends from companies that I worked for 20 years ago, and we will continue to be friends and are planning, trips together over the next 2 or 3 years. So I think it's an industry where you continue to learn stuff constantly. And for me, that's, I think that's really important, to have become, an agile trainer in the last 5 years when I'm sort of, should be doing management or whatever the path should be for someone. These are the things that you should do. Well, this is a very flexible industry. I've been able to, go back and work with teams, just with, 5 to 7 people at a time. It's been really enabling. So I think from that perspective, that's why I stay. And the reason why I've stayed where I am for the last few years is because the company has been flexible. DiUS has been really flexible as I've, got tighter, can't cope with full-time work. They've been really flexible and they've allowed me to, work, first a 9-day fortnight and now a 4-day week. So, it's really, it's a rare thing. And I wouldn't get that in lots of other organisations. Yeah, and actually I just saw Emily's thumb go there. The company I've been working with have accepted that. Most consultants, they expect to be around for 5 days a week. And I've been lucky. So that's what's kept me here.
Thanks, Bernie. Karen, did you want to add to that?
I did. I wanted to make 2 points. I think that technology it has to be one of the most flexible industries to be able to work in. You can work, even for me, if I have my laptop and internet connection, because now they exist, I actually can work anywhere. But the second point I wanted to make was that the job, there's so many jobs that didn't exist back in the day when I was, at uni. I mean, I grew up with something called COBOL, Lord forbid. And nowadays you have a look, the concept of things like customer experience, user experience, graphic design, all these things just didn't exist. And the jobs of tomorrow that are going to evolve in technology, because we are just so fast paced and moving so quickly, there is so much opportunity here, and to me, that's a really good reason to stay.
Nicole, one for you. What's the biggest lie we're telling ourselves about diversity? Just a small question.
The biggest lie, probably that ticking a box equals meaningful change. But I would say that's probably true for most causes that really need to be championed. And I guess I come at this through my lens, which is really about human behavior and what change actually takes, which was a huge part of my work in mental health. I guess I really got a sense of what it actually means to be totally present with very difficult and challenging realities. And what I've learned is not many people have the capacity to do that because they're literally not developed enough in themselves. They don't have a practice and a devotion and a dedication to actually have developed that presence within themselves. And so what the consequence of that is mostly unconsciously you reject what you can't actually hold and have presence towards. So I think it's a very ancient message. You've got to be the change you wish to see in the world. And I think a lot of the time we have these very external conversations, about what needs to change on the outside. And yeah, I think that can send, the whole of humanity down many convoluted rabbit holes when really the answers are within. And it's to look in the mirror and ask, do I extend myself, in a way that maybe feels a little bit uncomfortable? Am I willing to have conversations that are more provocative? Am I willing to feel emotions that maybe, my defenses can dismiss as a waste of time, you know, because until we get there in ourselves, men and women, it's essentially impossible to have the outer world change. We've got to do that inner work. And, you know, my journey before becoming an entrepreneur was as a performer. So I left school to perform, and that was actually a female dominated industry, right? And I can tell you guys that working in a female dominant industry was also extremely toxic. just for some, you know, sort of comparison. And my kind of message is that, yes, you know, men and women have differences. Obviously there's biological differences, there's cultural kind of roles that each gender have played historically. When you really go a little bit beneath the surface, you know, a good friend of mine did this amazing study around the variance of the emotional experience of men and women, because, you know, there's this stigma that women are more emotional than men, and actually the research shows that there's only a 1% variance in that. So I think what that shows is, you know, it's probably more culturally normal for women to talk about their emotions, but actually that's there, you know, both sides. And when you look at things like suicide rates, it's very clear that men struggle to express when they're not okay. So I think there's also a message there to the women in this conversation that, and this is definitely true to my experience, I've worked with a lot of men that have been massively, you know, championing of me as an entrepreneur, and I can name, you know, many men that I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for them. And I believe the equilibrium that's existed in our relationship has been, I've offered a space to help them actually, you know, get in touch with things that they haven't historically felt safe to talk about. So I think that there's a gift that women can bring that maybe there's a timidness or a shyness because there's a belief that it's just going to get rejected, maybe, that if you actually extend that, I've found most of the time men are extremely grateful for that, and that there's a bond that can be created, and a respect and a trust that can be created within that.
Yeah, really powerful. Really powerful. I'm conscious of time, but we have got a couple of questions that are rolling in. I think I'm going to go with maybe a bit of any of you can answer this one, because it does relate to in a startup kind of ecosystem, you know, when you've got a leadership group being 80% male and all the focus being go, 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 what are the real tangible things that you can do to drive diversity activity, you know, really tangible things to create inclusive environments?
I'm happy to have a first go at this because I'm living and breathing this. So except the 80% male part in the leadership, but definitely go, go, go. But yeah, it is tricky. And I think like the most tangible thing I can say is think about, like with the leaders, like ask them to think about the product that they're building and think about who that product's for, and think about what that means in terms of audience, target audience, and what that means in terms of representation on the product development team, and who is actually building that product and who's making decisions about the product. So I think that's probably the most objective way to, I think, to approach this. I know, like thinking about the way I've got a team of 13, right? So it's kind of small and lean, which is awesome. But I think every day about like how are we building the right team of cognitive diverse people to deliver the right product into our scientific community, and what do I need in terms of thinking and capability to be able to do that. And that's how I make a call on it. And I think I love this so much because it takes away the conversation about numbers, about, you know, men versus females. It's really more qualitative, and it makes you really think hard. It's not 50-50. It doesn't need to be 50-50. Cognitive diversity is not just males and females. So I think, yeah, that's probably the most tangible thing I can offer to start having that conversation with those people within your group, Noella.
Thanks, Paula. Anyone else want to add to that? No? Okay.
Sorry, that was Katia. Noella's question. Apologies.
I was too slow. I was just going to, I think we all know that what gets measured gets done, but it's measuring the right things. And I think it's an inclusivity of just, you know, measuring things around your collaboration and involvement of the team. And I think as well, also just really celebrating everyone's accomplishments does actually help create this environment where the diversity is celebrated. And I think they're just some small things that you can look at. It's not about measuring how many males versus females you have in the room, but I think it's the number of ideas that you want to create when you're coming up with new initiatives.
Thanks, Renece. Bernie?
I was just going to sort of add to that. It's about, we're made up of individuals, and I think by just lumping male, female, it really sort of, that's just then a dichotomy. You know, we've got a whole bunch of individuals here who, you know, who have different takes, different ideas about how things should be done. And diversity of thinking and approach takes in all of that, not lumping them in one camp or the other.
Yeah. Karen?
I would only add to that, and really just sticking to the concept of the individuality, that we really got to remember that everyone wants to be heard. And I think that we've got to take things back to basics. Take things back to basics and listen. On a recent panel we had two younger women, and they said, how can we make the workplace better for us, better for you? And it's like, listen to us, hear what it is that we're looking for individually. You can't just assume that, like, everything that we, you know, that because one person wants it, that everyone in whatever group you happen to be putting them into wants that or needs that. Hear them individually and start treating them as such and valuing them that way.
Yeah. Nicole?
Yeah, one thing I'd say that everyone can sort of go away and practice is to have a think about, you know, who are the 5 to 10 people professionally and in life that you spend the most time with, and just use that as a bit of a feedback tool to be able to see maybe if there is an echo chamber. And also ask yourself the question, you know, how much am I surrounded by people that agree with what I think? And if that sort of lines up, if there's kind of a similar avatar and you're surrounded by a group of people that are extreme kind of yes people, just actively trying to build relationships with people that you wouldn't otherwise build relationships with, that you know have different perspectives and opinions, because that's ultimately what allows us to keep our bias, you know, in check, is when we actively do that. And not just men and women, like across the spectrum, you know, religion, sexuality, age, you know, are you only surrounding yourself with people that are in your age bracket? Because that's a big thing too. You know, if you want to support women in tech, that might look really different for a 40-year-old female compared to a 20-year-old female. So yeah, I think that's something we can all become more conscious of.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Fantastic insights from the panel. Thank you all so much for your time. We are out of time. I'm conscious there are still a couple of questions that are there, and there may still be an opportunity to send through your questions with that text if you like. What we're going to do is catch all of those unanswered questions and then direct you to our DiUS Slack community channel, because what we will do is to commit to finishing off and answering all the questions in there. So head over to the DiUS Slack community in the AMA channel. We will send out a follow-up EDM for anyone that's registered for this event after this conversation, so you've got the details to go there. And one little plug, I had a very interesting conversation earlier on this morning with Kirsten, who's working at Swinburne University of Technology. We will share this link as well. She's basically doing a research project on this specific topic, and she's looking for participants. So we felt like it was a great avenue to kind of link a couple of things in a much more holistic way. The link's there. We'll shoot it out in this EDM so you've got access to it as well. If you're willing to participate, they're specifically looking for people under 40. They've got a lot of people over the age of 40, but not a lot in that under group. So bit of a plug there. thank you so much to our panelists, Renece, Karen, Bernie, Paula, Nicole, Michelle. Have I missed anyone? No? Super insightful. You are all such impressive individuals. I know I've learned a lot. We thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for joining today. Hope you learned something. Feel free to keep shooting those questions through. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.